Welcome to the Canary Collective podcast. This is another episode about healing our bodies and healing our earth. And in this episode, I am so excited for you to hear the interview that I did back in May 2020 with the Geoship co founders, Bass and Morgan. Unfortunately, I screwed up and there are some audio issues with this episode, so I apologize. But as I'm still going through medical treatment and I have limited energy, I'm not able to really redo the interview, but it's still listenable and there's so much good stuff in there. So I hope that it's not too difficult to hear. And if it is, you can always go to YouTube via the anchor.fm website for the Canary Collective podcast. And on YouTube, there might be some subtitles that would help you. The subtitles might not be completely accurate, but I look forward to improving the quality of these interviews during a pandemic and being a climate crisis and housing and health crisis nomad myself. I hope that you can support the Canary Collective podcast and the music behind it at patreon.com/KPH for just $1 a month. But it would be amazing. But of course, if not, all of this is for free for you all to listen to. Thank you and enjoy. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and share about Geoship, the newest vision for non-toxic, affordable, harmonizing housing that will change the way that we live on this planet in our homes, I hope. So this is the Canary Collective. I'm Kaylee Pruitt-Hamm, and I am sitting on Zoom with Morgan and Bass, who are both co-founders of a company called Geoship. And you're beaming in from Nevada City, California?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is it?
Hey.
So your production of these homes has not slowed down during the pandemic, and that's really exciting. I wanted to talk with you about just kind of fill people in on this new idea, this new company that is offering a solution to so many problems that the canaries of the world are feeling. But I know that a lot of people aren't necessarily seeing or feeling all the problems of our housing crisis that everybody else is. Some people are semi-happily renting apartments and feeling okay, but for a lot of people with chronic illness like me, we have been confronted with the reality of how toxic our building construction materials are that most people are using now since the 70s and before, from new paint chemicals to formaldehyde and wood to the different molds that are developing. So anyway, just catching people up about toxic housing. And as people know, with my journey, I suddenly became basically allergic and intolerant of chemicals in most and molds in housing. And I have moved scores of times in the last 5 years since I got diagnosed with multiple chemical sensitivity, MCS, or environmental illness. Which often when you have infections like Lyme disease and chronic diseases or cancer or go through chemo, when your body is really overwhelmed, your immune system is overwhelmed, it doesn't process toxins as well. So a lot of people who've been through chemotherapy for lupus or cancer, they have to go fragrance free and be very careful about the walls, what's behind the walls that they're living in. And I know so many people, so many of my canary friends like me have been forced to live in vans in the backs of their cars, living in tents, peeing in buckets, which a lot of people, there's a huge homelessness crisis. And a lot of people, even if they can afford housing, they can't find housing that works for them. So now that we've talked about the problem, I do want to talk more about your analysis of the problem and what led you to suggest this solution with Geoship. So can you explain a little bit about what dome Geoship homes would look like and be like?
Yeah. I think it starts with explaining that these dome homes are like made 100% of ceramic material called bioceramic, which is also used in, for example, bone repair, so in the body.
So inside the human body, just as an example of like how it's actually compatible with life.
Wow, so the bones of your home would be made of a similar material that is used in the human body for bone repair.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, so you're thinking of building these dome homes that are made of bioceramic material that is less toxic than the stuff we use. I saw on your website you list a couple of statistics. One of them stuck out to me that I hadn't heard before, that 40% of CO2 emissions are estimated to be related to building construction materials, actually contributing to climate change and climate crises. And I also read in an interview that you, Morgan, who are one of the co-founders of the company Geoship, you were inspired to start coming up with solutions like this that were better with less toxic materials. When you were working on your brother's home, you were building a home. So what kind of materials do most people use when they're setting out to build a home that are toxic?
Yeah, pretty much the majority of the materials that are used in the house have potentially toxic substances that, and you know, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency formed the Toxic Substances Control Act, you know, back in like the 1960s. And, you know, a lot of experts kind of refer to it as the 40-year-old virgin because it's been updated like twice, you know, like asbestos came around and they updated it. But other than that, it's like, you know, these building product companies are allowed to pretty much use whatever chemicals they want in the materials, and it's legal until somebody files a claim and it goes to court, and then maybe the Toxic Substances Control Act gets updated. So I think, you know, in most homes, you've got toxic drywall, you know, there's high levels of like heavy metals and whatnot in the drywall often. You've got the formaldehyde binder that is in the plywood that's used for, you know, the OSB.
Yeah, the OSB.
There's a lot of chemicals in the house wraps that are used, and then the insulation materials. Sometimes they even use, you know, spray foam insulation, which is just, you know, off-gassing toxic material or toxic chemicals, you know, for a long time. In fact, even, you know, it's like we've been kind of conditioned to think that like that new car smell is like a good thing. But, you know, it's like even in even in China, like a lot of the just normal Chinese people, like, you know, not wealthy people, but just like your average, like, you know, the billion or so people in China, they know, you know, if there's a house that's built with Western materials and you smell that smell, you don't go in it for at least a few years, you know, for it to like air out.
Years.
Yeah. And then taking that to the next level is like using materials that are actually biologically resonant, you know, so like materials that would be accepted by the body if we were to put them inside of us.
If you could eat your home.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, it's like, it's kind of at one level, removing the toxic materials. At another level, it's really also just optimizing the light, water, and electromagnetic environment in general, because the chemicals are one form of pollution. Another form of pollution is just the electric fields and the magnetic fields and the microwave radiation and dirty electricity. And all those things, we're basically, designing the home so that all those variables in terms of, environmental toxicity are addressed.
And even the architecture is not just not negative, but it is, you're taking it to the positive of actually maybe creating health and even being good for the environment and helping offset harms that humans have placed on the planet through the way that it's built, the architecture that I don't think about, a lot of people don't think about the way geometry and shape affects our bodies as well. That's a very cutting edge of science, or should we say going back to thousands of years when Egyptians and ancient peoples understood this stuff. But now we're like returning to that knowledge. So I hear that you're working with a Cairo-based Egyptian company, the Center for Biogeometrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what are some of the principles that are guiding the architecture to be a more harmonizing space for people to live in a healthy way?
Well, biogeometry is basically the science of how geometry, so how shapes influence the space. We think of this space as like, okay, there's nothing happening, but at the same time we accept that our cell phones and our computers and there's a lot of stuff are just working. So we know there's a lot of stuff happening here. So how is the shape of a space and the material of the space actually like collaborating and like harmonizing what's happening within the space?
Yeah, they really think of like, like not only the shape of the space, but the way that space is laid out, the feng shui, basically of the interiors and whatnot, and of the kind of garden around it. And, if you think of all these materials and all the physical objects in our environment are ways that the energy field gets changed. It's like if we understand there's kind of a super fluid ether around us, and everything that moves is putting out wakes in the ether, including the electromagnetic waves. So we can, build environments where there's just a lot of kind of chaos going on in our environment, or we can build environments that are kind of designed to harmonize the electromagnetic field. So basically, if you imagine like a boat going through the water and sending out wakes behind it, when the wake hits a buoy, it changes its shape, if there's a buoy in the water. And basically all these physical objects are like buoys in the water that are changing the shape of the, ether. So biogeometry is this whole science around like how does shape affect our biology. And they do some amazing studies of like, for instance, like putting some sensors on kids who are, autistic, right? So really sensitive children, and watching like how does the brainwave patterns change when you just make a right angle on a piece of paper, right? And you can actually see, there's tension that's created with just making a right angle on a piece of paper. Because when we do that, we're changing the electromagnetic field just by moving our hand or by drawing something in a place. We're changing the flow of energy. So then you do the same test with a certain angles that are more harmonic, like 45 or 60-degree angles, and there's more of a relaxed state that comes around. Because that 90-degree corner is basically, anyone can see this when you put a shield underneath some water that's falling or up to some wind. It's like the 90-degree angle is the one that
most
scatters everything. It's the maximum interference in a sense, and pretty much any other angle will kind of focus the energy more in one direction or the other. So
there's so many companies out there that are trying to make non-toxic, like really cool, well-built, earth ships, or it's like a huge project, involving so much labor just for one home, for one couple or one family, that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I know that a lot of my Canary friends out there who are living on disability, which is $800 a month, which I am, who are struggling to afford healthcare bills. I have read that you're actively planning on making this part of a solution for the homelessness crisis. So how much do you hope eventually in 3 or 4 or 5 years will a small single home cost to build about?
Yeah, I think it's a production technology. Like the way they've built homes so far in the last 100 years, it's like each home is kind of a construction project. It's like they're each individually built, but these are more like we're mass producing uh, building panels that all fit together like a piece of IKEA furniture kind of thing. So there's the potential to get on kind of a whole new affordability curve. So, our goal, like in 5 to 10 years, the goal is to bring the price to income ratio of housing back down to 2 to 2.5x, which is what it was in the 1950s. Right now, it's like 6 to 9x. And that's kind of crazy because you think, as they continue building the same thing over and over and over again, that you would get more efficient and prices would go down. But that's not the case. Prices just continue to go up, and the land is one aspect of it, but it's also just the construction costs that continue to go up. So I think we're addressing, like, on a per square foot level, the cost of a bioceramic dome will start out to be about maybe 10% less than a conventional wood house, and I think in 5 to 10 years will be 50 to 70% less, just a whole nother affordability curve. So really, a lot of savings can also come in by, living communally. So, these domes are basically made to interconnect with one another. So, I think especially for like kind of people in their 20s and whatnot, 30s, and also older generation too, but like kind of co-housing uh, situations where you have like kind of a big common dome that has your kitchen and common space, and then off of that common dome is maybe 5 or so small domes that are kind of like the private quarters, right? Our goal is to be able to build kind of a co-housing setup like that somebody could afford on minimum wage, right? And actually get ownership in their community home. So it's kind of like it's not quite tiny home. It's a little bit better than tiny home because at least you're connected to a big space. It's more like sharing a big house when you have a bunch of rooms, but they're more private because they're actually separate buildings that are just connected.
Yeah, I love that. It's a crisis of loneliness that we have on our hands too, to be just boxed into ticky-tacky boxes and be cut off from the community model of making it through. Speaking of community, also, like, we have so many GoFundMe's, fundraisers, because they need like $100,000 before next month in order to like afford this surgery or afford building out a van to live in. And it just can't keep on going on like this, like fundraising GoFundMe's for each individual person, because we don't have a safety net of community and funding and social services for the basic human needs getting met of healthcare and housing. Then I highly suggest investing. You have a crowdfunding site that is crowd investing, so that you can build up the production so that you can get this thing going and have a way of mass producing these.
It's a start engine. So if you Google Geoship or start engine, either way you'll find it.
Yeah, so everyone Google also, Geoship start engine.
I think another big kind of factor in the affordability equation, right, is also like the operational expenses and the maintenance costs. And so, these domes can be very, very, very efficient in terms of like how much energy is required to, heat and cool it and, keep the lights on and basic. So very high operational efficiency and really high or really low maintenance. So the design life of these bioceramic domes is like 500 years, and you don't have there's never like siding to replace. There's never roofing to replace. It's like, it's all ceramic. There's nothing to rot. There's nothing to burn. There's nothing to corrode. It's like hurricanes and earthquakes and fires are all, uh, it's resilient through all those kind of natural kind of calamities. And then also on top of this, it's like you mentioned, 40% of CO2 emissions are coming from the construction and operation of buildings. So about half of it is like the operation of the buildings that we live in. So, running the building. And about half of it is the the CO2 that's embodied in the building materials, right? How much energy does it take to make these materials that we make our homes out of? And so one of the exciting things too about the bioceramic dome technology is that the embodied energy of the dome has the potential to actually be carbon negative. So actually, because the ceramic sequesters CO2, kind of like a tree, it's just like is drawing in CO2 from the atmosphere. Yeah. So, and we can kind of accelerate that in a precast plant. So basically, we can build homes that actually sequester more CO2 than was required to produce them. So the embodied energy is like negative, so it's like, homes that are healthier, more affordable, and better for the planet too.
Yeah, and then we're working towards actually getting our materials from sustainable sources, from waste stream sources. Like the magnesium comes from saltwater desalination, and phosphates come from wastewater treatment plants, which is basically it's a waste product there. And but if you imagine, these are actually sources that are available all around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically anywhere you have salt water and a sewage treatment plant, we have the basic raw minerals to build these homes with. Yeah. And those are as waste.
Wow. Possibly a home made out of really abundant material that is not adding to the giant amount of waste and CO2 that we have already. And because we are facing the next 3 to 5, 10 years, really, when you're thinking about your future, and I'm thinking about my future, like how am I going to find a home? I currently have all my stuff sitting around in boxes. I don't know where I'm going to live. I'm going to a doctor for a month in Denver next month, and I have all my stuff sitting around in a friend's basement. Like I don't have a home right now. And I am thinking, I'm 30, like we're creating an imbalance that the earth is gonna be reacting to. And so planning ahead, and if you are gonna invest in a home, why not invest in a home that is built to withstand floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, and even pests? So I am so excited about this possibility of Geoship. And NIH, National Institutes of Health study found that 70 to 90% of chronic illnesses are estimated to be environmentally linked. And so I was wondering if you know anyone who is impacted by chronic illness, and have you talked with many people who have made that link between their health issues and the housing crisis or toxic housing?
Oh yeah, I mean, lots. So we've spoken to a lot of people who are aware of, they're like chemically sensitive or electrically sensitive, and, just aware that it's the environment. And of course, like something like half the American population has some sort of chronic disease nowadays. So how many of them are aware that it's tied to
mold in their house or whatever?
Yeah, those kind of things is less. And then it's also these factors of like toxic. It's so I think the chemicals and the mold are kind of at the forefront, and then there's these other, the electromagnetic fields and the lighting and our disconnection from the earth and whatnot. So I think
Yeah.
all of those little variables are all, they affect everybody, and people might not, people might feel depressed or, a lot of anxiety and just they're not sleeping well, but they don't really think there's anything necessarily wrong. I think that's kind of like normal, right? It's normal to have anxiety and depression and these things. No, it's actually not. It's not normal at all. When you can build or
especially people in the Western world, it's like, what is it to be healthy? Do we even know? Because we have built an environment for ourselves in our homes, in our cities, everywhere we go, that's basically not healthy for us. It's not in harmony with nature and living.
Yeah, and if anyone listening right now is suffering from depression and anxiety, we're not saying that you're not normal, like you are not alone, and no, there's nothing wrong with you feeling feelings. I have suffered from depression as well, and neurological aspects of my disease that I was at first going to doctors having these neurological issues and being told that it was just something that I could go to counseling for. And I think that like psychotherapy and supporting one another to like feel our feelings and just be okay if we are depressed, like you're still worthy and of love, and it's fine to live your life that way. But if you are thinking, no, something's off, like I don't always feel this way, like I don't want to feel this way, I want to feel better, and you're seeking answers and doctors are still just telling you to go to counseling, like that can definitely help and is so important. But we also might be missing these factors of like, oh wow, you're like living in a house with hidden mold behind the walls and didn't know it, and like as soon as you go and move into a less toxic home, your like neurological system is less impacted and inflamed, and it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with the challenges of life with like a healthier brain that's processing toxins better. If 1 in 2 Americans are dealing with a chronic illness, then we know a lot of people with chronic illness, but not as many people who are making that link between illness and potential housing factors and environmental factors.
Yeah, but there's definitely, more and more people making the link all the time because the science is coming out, around like epigenetics, right? That the formation of so like diseases are not being passed down from generation to generation. You might have a genetic predisposition to something, but there's something in our environment that really triggers that predisposition, And I think the pandemic that's happening too is kind of an interesting, like the whole premise of the whole thing is kind of germ theory. In order to stay well, you got to like stop the thing stop the diseases from attacking in a sense. And kind of the complementary view of that is like terrain theory, where, in order to prevent disease, we build health, build our immunity and just get really as healthy as possible. And that's a way to, prevent disease.
Not to like stretch it way to a different tangent, but you can apply that terrain theory to like peacemaking efforts and conflict areas, which used to be my field. I majored in international conflict and communications and traveled doing research projects and work with humanitarian organizations in places like Rwanda and Bosnia. And a lot of the organizations in those countries that I was hearing from and El Salvador were saying that, peace is not the absence of war. Like you have to build peace with justice. And you might build a foreign policy or domestic conflict policy off of, fighting against with the offense and the defense of the violence of saying this military group is bombing us, so we bomb them. And I think that's really, that militaristic view applies to our germ theory and the way that we deal with pandemics as well. Not that we don't really need to protect people and make sure that people aren't killing people and put up defenses, but maybe also we build health and we build justice and we build the things that are the positives that are going to address the root causes of why people are unhappy and why people are fighting and why people are unhealthy. Yeah.
Yeah, and this also makes me think about like just equality and coming back to actually this investment campaign where it's really about, so how can we share the ownership, you know, how can we're starting this multi-stakeholder cooperative, yeah, to really make sure that yeah, the wealth and the ownership is distributed, you know, and everybody involved is actually is part of this process, including also nature as a stakeholder, as we're simply using materials from our environment. And so how can we create systems to make sure that yeah, what's touched is also being valued and being given back, so to say, and restored.
So just to clarify, basically we're issuing equity to customers and to nature, right? So everybody who buys a home will also own shares in the company, right? And the way we issue shares to nature is through this kind of personhood for nature movement. So they're like in New Zealand, you know, for instance, River Wanganui and Mount Taranaki were recently recognized as like legal persons in the court. So now as those mountains and rivers are recognized as persons, we can actually issue equity to them. And then, you know, so if we're using minerals from some area, we can regenerate that deficit that we've created in a sense.
Wow. Yeah, it's an amazing paradigm shift. And I think an also very important step is that, like, in terms of in the United States, we need to be acknowledging and following treaty law, which we have been completely illegally mistreating Native Americans and indigenous peoples around the world, especially in the United States, just continuing to not follow treaty law and just recognize indigenous people as full humans who deserve rights that the government promised them many centuries ago. So the mountains, the rivers, and the trees and nature having rights and having a say, and all human citizens, we really need to get even to that place of recognizing everyone as having rights and honoring those rights and interests. So I am so glad that you're, again, on the cutting edge of, or should I say the building edge of really thinking about the impact of what you're doing and being held accountable to making something that's for the greatest good of as many people and living beings as possible, rather than just forming a company in the interest of the CEOs and the CFOs and, you know, people who are wanting to make a profit.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the thing that motivates us is just this experience of living in a kind of thriving health, right? And that's not, it's like having a home that is non-toxic and, you know, environment or biologically resonant is like one part. The other part is like, what are the quality of our relationships to our neighbors and to, you know, the people that are in our lives. So we're addressing that through kind of a village building platform, right? So Geoship will be set up so that you can kind of go onto our website and to make a declaration like, I want to build a community, and invite your friends. And then we take that kind of community through a whole design build process and figure out the land acquisition and potentially like community land trust kind of model and financing, and, you know, really helping that community kind of hone a collective vision together. So kind of address the relationships that also, affect our health, as well as our relationship to the land, right? To the ecosystems that are around us. Because basically all three of those things have to be thriving in order for us to really have this kind of next level of health. It's like healthy relationships, healthy land, and healthy homes.
Yes, that's so good. Oh, I'm so excited. I really, really am thinking about my niece and nephew and what are they going to be facing? What are the challenges that they're going to be facing? A lot of storms, earthquakes potentially. I want them to be as safe as possible and I want them to be as happy as possible. They're very sensitive children. We've got some really interesting patterns showing up in the later generations of increased sensitivity, and how do we celebrate that and work with that to really make humanity lean into our superpowers of sensitivity. And that's what the Canary Collective is about. So we can feel what's not right with our housing and point to solutions. I'm so excited for Geoship. So everybody check out their website. You have a really great team working on the visuals and your website and social media. It was so, the way that you word everything and the way that it all comes together, and visually the models, the animation, it's just beautiful. It looks like it would be so much fun to live in those domes. Have you ever lived in like a geodesic dome, which are not built with bioceramics?
Only for short periods, not for like a long stint in life. So.
I never lived in one. I grew up close to where there was this big geodesic structure, which was a museum, and it's like always fascinated, And it's awesome to be around spaces.
Yeah, one of the guys on our team here built the first round hempcrete house in the U.S. And he did it because he was in a yurt, with a group of people one night, and everybody was telling stories, and it was like the energy, it's like he just felt really alive at that moment in this round space, with friends. And then that put him onto a whole trajectory for the last 10 years about building domes and round spaces in order to try to recreate that, recapture it,
And that's for the communal energy, but also music in these kind of spaces is amazing. It's it really gets to another level of experience.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that the right angles kind of scatter the waves, and it made me think about harmony, sound waves. Like the definition of harmony is this sense of order amidst diversity. It's like the diversity of having different notes. You don't have to have uniformity to have peace. You can have diversity and celebrate everyone in their places working together. And if you that's harmony, those two notes. If it's that really scatters a lot. So
that kind of golden ratio, it's like all through the dome. So essentially you've got circles, if you draw a circle around a dome and it connects all the hubs, and you draw another circle, move up and draw another circle and another circle, those circles are like golden ratio to one another. So you have these harmonics happening in the dome. And then we can kind of tune use the cellular ceramic and the kind of shapes on the walls, the texture of the walls, to make it so that there's no echo. It's like there's that sweet spot, like sound is getting focused into a sweet spot, but there's not it's like a perfect silent echo kind of thing. Exciting. The acoustics, developing the acoustics are really an exciting aspect for sure. And that's the same energy when we talk about this kind of superfluid ether and, these waves that we create in our environment or that just exist. Those are the same type of wave as a sound wave. It's a longitudinal electromagnetic wave, right? And so kind of what the sound does is also what the kind of chi energy or, is doing. That's why the kind of the indigenous shaman would like look for the place with the perfect echo, right? Like use the drum and try to find that place of the perfect echo, and that's like the sweet spot where the chi energy is accumulating.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that quite, because my sister is an opera singer, and growing up, we would always, wherever we went, we would look for the place with the best reverb. We would go to like parking garages, and we would go to bathrooms with like ceramic tile, sing and enjoy the reverb and the resonance of those spaces. So that's so cool that you're reminding me of that indigenous shamanic healers would do that. I think a lot of us have these instincts, and it's nice to remember, things that so many people have known for thousands of years, but the Western colonializing model has kind of beaten out of us. So I like to do a thing before we end the podcast, on every podcast, where we pretend for 30 seconds to a minute that we are in the year 2040 and we're having a reunion podcast where we check in, and let's pretend that Geoships are the norm. They are launched, they are affordable, they are just an accepted thing, just as van life is getting to be such an accepted thing, just as a rectangular apartment building is an accepted thing. And do you want to talk in the present tense together as we talk about our victories?
Okay.
Yeah, welcome to our dome home here.
Oh, thank you. It feels so good. I can't believe we were talking 20 years ago and you were just starting building up production. And I'm so glad that those big investors helped, and it became a viral sensation. And now look at you now. It's just all over the world. You're helping so many people reclaim their health. And thank you. Wow. So you got like a sound healing echo in here. Do you have a lot of concerts in this dome home?
Yeah, concerts with lots of people, but also just for myself, singing or making music with instruments just to enjoy.
Remember when it was just an epidemic of like fibromyalgia and environmental illness and thyroid issues, and people finally started to connect the dots? And I'm just so glad that bioceramic material, people, that you helped make that a thing in the world.
Yeah.
Healthier.
Remember this time where we're basically building homes which disconnected us from nature, and now we can actually be in a home that feels more like an extension of ourselves and nature coming together.
I feel so connected to nature in these dome homes. It's like really restoring our relationship with Mother Earth and each other and ourselves.
Yeah, just like our ancestors were building stone circles for thousands of years, and we just forgot for a little while there, but now we're back.
Thank you, Geoship. Thank you, Morgan and Bass, for talking with me. And I hope that we do make that a reality and we can all hang out in a dome home in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, Kaylee. So nice to talk to you.